It's actually pretty easy to learn a new language if you take the steps that I'm going to share with you in this video. I meet people who tell me that they're trying to learn a language and will talk about whatever app they're using. I see you, owl, but they're often not making much progress, and it's because they're missing some of the crucial pieces to the puzzle, which will mean that the process is not only harder, they might be destined for failure. I used to be in the same position, and it was only after doing the things that I'm going to show you that I was finally able to learn Spanish and Mandarin to different levels. So in this video, I'll share with you the simple changes you need to make, what they are, and how you can easily do them to ensure that you finally reach fluency. Imagine you're going to learn the piano. You have visions of one day wooing the future love of your life with the perfect song. You download a fancy app, but every day the piano is sitting there just waiting for you to sit down and finally get round to nailing that song. You try and play it from time to time, but there's always something more important to do. Life happens to all of us, I get it, but obviously you're going to suck at playing the piano. It's the big thing I notice when I speak to people who say that they want to learn a language. It's just they never make time for it. A simple thing you can do is just block out some time in your day to make a point of say, I'm going to do at least, say, 30 minutes and I'm going to give this my full attention. Quickly, you'll realize that you're starting to make some progress, and that will encourage you to spend more time doing it so you make even more progress. But you do have to get started. So look at your calendar and literally book out the time that you're going to do something with the language every day. Now, I know some people don't like to be so rigid. Totally get it. But if you never have a specific moment in your day, then you won't always find time for it with everything else going on. Start small to build up the habit and ensure consistency, and you can add more stuff over time. Now, shift workers, don't you tell me that this doesn't work. I worked a shift pattern for 10 years, and if you have the inclination, you can totally make it work. Either you just accept that your week is a different length to other people's. My week used to be 9 days, for example, and you can block out your time in the calendar for it, just like anyone else. You just have to accept that your week doesn't fit in with necessarily what the world's going on. Or you can link it to something else you already do. So this is called anchoring or habit stacking. So for me, literally every time I got in a car to drive to or from work, I would listen to Spanish. So that was an hour and a half minimum of Spanish every day. Also, I know you're all adults, but if going to bed at a reasonable hour means that you can get up early because that's the only time you have to do something, well, maybe that's not such a bad idea. You don't have to completely change your life right now, but you do need to make some level of commitment if you want to see progress. So here's a question for you. Do you want to make your life harder? Of course not, unless you're a weirdo. So essentially, when you're learning a language, it makes sense to think about what kind of person you are. Some people are night owls and others are early birds. I actually did some reading on this, and it's actually not quite as simple to say that we're either one or the other. But essentially, we all have a time in our circadian rhythms when we have a bit more energy each day. So it makes sense to do your best and try and use the time where you have most energy to get the exposure that you want to the language. If you're an early bird and then you wait until late in the day, it might not be the best strategy. Similarly, if you're a night owl and you force yourself out of bed early to do something with the language you're learning, it's going to be more painful than it needs to be. Life isn't always that simple, and so if you can't manage to find a time that works for you because of other commitments, that's not the end of the world. Just accept that you can do a lower energy version of whatever you wanted to do, like watch an easy video or listen to or read something that you've already done before. That way you can reinforce the words and patterns you already know without having to spend so much energy in understanding the material in the first place. Now, I remember when I was struggling to make progress with my Chinese, and aside from not having the habit to do something every day, I also suffered from another issue. Because I wasn't making the progress I wanted, I had shiny object syndrome. You might have had this too, where you see something like a new resource and you think, this might be the missing piece of the puzzle where I'll finally make the progress that I want. So you spend some money on it, or you download something, whatever it is. That act feels like progress, but you haven't actually done anything with the language you're learning. And if you're not using whatever it is properly, then in reality, you're still in exactly the same place, although you might be a little bit poorer. And so that's what I would do. I'd buy an app or subscriptions or a textbook, whatever it was, but the problem wasn't the resources, it was me. Only when I stopped jumping around and consistently stuck with graded readers and listening to the audio for them did I notice that my level was starting to improve. So There's lots of resources to choose from, and I'm not saying you have to only stick with one, but if you only have a certain amount of time, you might be spreading yourself too thin if you get impulsive and just get too much stuff. Just find a resource or a few things that appeal so you have some variety and try and stick to them. If you genuinely do try them and you feel that they're not working for you, then of course you can try something else. Just be careful of shiny object syndrome. Right, so this is a simple rule that you want to follow to ensure success. When you first start learning a language, you don't understand anything, right? But after a while, you start to understand some of the basic words and phrases. That's great. You have made some progress. Give yourself a pat on the back. Bit weird. But something that's happened to me and other people I know is this. You get comfortable. You go from not understanding anything to being able to understand all of this beginner stuff. But when you try anything harder, you end up going back to that point of not understanding everything. But here's the simple rule. Don't stay in the same place. Keep going. When you start to feel more comfortable, it's time to move on. Now, I'm not saying find stuff that's way too difficult, because that won't work, but finding something that's right at the edge of your comfort zone or maybe just beyond will keep you improving. If you live by this when it comes to language learning, you'll be able to look back and see how far you've come. So if you stay in that comfortable zone where you understand everything around you, but no more, you're going to be destined to stay a beginner for much longer than you need to. So keep moving on. Now, this isn't rocket science, but it needs to be said. You don't want to worry about optimizing every moment of your learning because ultimately it's about enjoying the process. That will help you keep consistent, which is the most important thing. But one thing that will help you get the most from whatever you're using is be sure to review stuff. Now, you can do that in various ways. So if you're very studious, you might want to make notes or review vocabulary. But it's worth remembering that sometimes the easiest thing to do generally has a lower barrier to entry, and so you're more likely to do it. So simply reading, listening, or watching it again will give you a reminder to reinforce whatever you got from it last time and potentially pick up some new things now that you've got more working memory this time around. Like I say, it's not rocket science, but without it, you could be missing out. So it's easy to overlook this next point, but it's actually incredibly powerful. Aside from learning languages, I like to do Kung Fu, and many times over the years, I found myself at various dinners in China, and some of them have been huge. But even without perfect Chinese, this is one thing that will make a huge difference to the experience of any language learner. So to give you an example, in Chinese culture, every time you go to do what we would call cheers, where you hit two glasses together, you always want to make sure that the rim of your glass goes lower than the person that you're toasting. You're basically being humble by saying that you're lower than the other person. And by showing some level of cultural knowledge, you can massively break the ice and seem less like an outsider. That opens the door to more conversations and definitely more drinking in this case. But whatever it is you do, it helps build connections and have interesting experiences. So don't overlook the value in learning about the customs and cultures linked to whatever language you're learning. It's more than just remembering new words. Even if you learn about the culture, say in English, it can have an incredible impact and enrich your learning experience. Now, learning a language isn't always a straightforward process. Some days are going to be better than others. You can't control that, sadly. What you can control, though, is what you put in. I'm a big believer in habits and consistency. So commit to doing something manageable each day. And as you get used to that small habit, you can add more over time. To get started, check out this next video where I'll show you a simple way to create that daily habit.